The first time Soren Pike tasted the thoraxy fire fruit, he winced only slightly. The fruit, which resembled a glowing purple pepper dipped in molten lava, hissed in his hand as the oils reacted with the dry air inside the diplomatic chamber. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, then swallowed. Soren said, lifting one brow. Mildly spicy. Ambassador Vellner of the Thoraxy Confederation blinked, all four eyes at once. A flicker of confusion passed across his pale, translucent face. The chamber, previously humming with the low vibrations of interspecies discussion, went utterly silent. You did not vaporize, Vellner said cautiously. Soren reached for the goblet of water on the table, took a sip, and looked around at the stunned faces. Was I supposed to? The fire fruit is considered a chemical weapon in over 9 planetary jurisdictions, Vellner replied. He turned slowly to the translator drone hovering nearby. Confirm the species' biological classification. Is he human? Confirmed, the drone replied in its neutral tone. Homo sapiens. No genetic augmentation detected. Soren set the goblet down with a soft clink. You guys seriously eat this stuff for fun? No, Vellner said. We do not eat it at all. It is ornamental, symbolic of resilience. Soren said, reaching for a second one. Well, it does have a kick, but it's not ghost pepper level or anything. You should try Carolina Reapers sometime. The silence returned. Soren chewed. 2 days earlier, Soren had been briefed on the thoraxy before boarding the diplomatic vessel from Earth. He was chosen not because he was a seasoned envoy, but because the original delegate had come down with a stomach virus and Soren happened to be the closest cultural liaison available within a 6-hour radius. His experience was mostly with culinary diplomacy, food contests, fusion tastings, that sort of thing. He hadn't expected his first interstellar assignment to involve near-lethal ornamentals. The fire fruit incident, as it would later be called in over 40 thoraxy news cycles, earned Soren an invitation to the core delegation hall on Brella 9, where species from over 200 systems convened to resolve disputes and share knowledge. Vellner personally escorted him. You consumed the fruit with minimal reaction, Vellner said as they entered the hall. This has disrupted a long-standing cultural belief. Sorry about that, Soren said. Not trying to offend anyone. You have not offended, Vellner replied. You have. Complicated. As they walked through the shimmering corridors of the hall, a few other delegates paused to look at Soren. A trio of Relians murmured in their native clicks translated by earpieces Soren had been issued as they eyed him cautiously. That's the one of them whispered. The human who devours flame. Soren gave an awkward wave. When they reached the central meeting chamber, Vellner motioned for Soren to sit at a small table, where a tray of various cultural foods had been prepared for the event called the Exchange, a ceremonial tasting designed to foster understanding through shared experience. It was not mandatory for every delegation, but Vellner had insisted. I wish to test a theory, Vellner said. With your permission. Soren shrugged. As long as I'm not eating anything that's going to, kill me. A few minutes later, a safari diplomat approached carrying a tray. The safari were a reptilian species, their scales a soft green. The diplomat bowed and presented a cube of something that glistened like magma. This is krelith, the diplomat said. It is the hottest known edible substance in our culinary tradition. Soren leaned forward. Smells like cinnamon. It is not, the safari said. Noted. He picked it up with the provided tweezers and popped it into his mouth. The reaction was immediate. His eyes watered, his nose ran, and he coughed once, twice. He reached for the water and drank deeply. Then he sat back and exhaled. Okay, he said, voice raspy. Now that one's spicy. Vellner leaned forward. You are in pain? Yeah, Soren said. But manageable. You should see what happens when my Uncle Rick makes his famous, hell chili. People sign liability waivers. The safari diplomat looked horrified. Is it a punishment ritual? He asked. Soren chuckled, then coughed again. No, it's a barbecue. Over the next hour, Soren sampled 7 more dishes, each from different species and each intended to test the limits of his sensory tolerance. Some were spicy, some sour to the point of pain, and one somehow made the air around him taste like burnt rubber. He survived them all. By the end of the tasting, a small crowd had gathered in the chamber. Delegates whispered, took notes, and exchanged glances. Vellner stood with his arms folded. You are not immune, he said. You experience discomfort. Definitely, Soren said, wiping his forehead. But I guess humans just get used to stuff. We like pushing limits. A cultural trait? Pretty much. The next morning, Soren woke with a dull ache in his stomach and a fierce burn in his throat. The medical unit aboard the delegation ship ran standard tests and found no internal damage, just irritation and dehydration. You should rest, the medic, a tall, bird-like avianian, advised. You have exceeded safe exposure levels for multiple compounds. Soren nodded. Yeah, I kinda figured. He stayed in his quarters most of the day, sipping electrolyte water and watching old cooking shows from Earth. By evening, he felt decent enough to attend a smaller reception hosted by the Drawl, a species known for their fermented root delicacies. Despite his earlier ordeal, Soren was offered a pale root wrapped in leaves. This is not spicy, the Drawl host clarified, but it may cause hallucinations. Soren hesitated. I'll pass on that one, thanks. The host bowed politely. Understood. Across the room, Vellner approached with a look of what Soren could only guess was concern. You are recovering? Barely. Your name is spreading, Vellner said. Among the Zarn, you are referred to as the tongue that knows no pain. Soren sighed. That's not even true. No, Vellner replied. But legends need not be. Later that week, a delegation from the Pyrrhics arrived. They were a fire-dwelling species from the scorched moons of Zira, and their diets were considered incompatible with most life forms. A demonstration of their culinary practices was arranged, and Soren, once again, was asked to attend. I'm not eating literal lava, he said flatly. No lava, the Pyrrhic chef assured. Just the extract of the vern root. It is potent. Soren eyed the dish, which shimmered with internal heat. The last time he had ignored a warning, he'd spent 2 days with what felt like a sunburn in his intestines. One bite, he said. The Pyrrhics nodded. Soren took the bite. It was like swallowing a furnace. He clenched his teeth, tears streaming down his face. His throat closed halfway, and he coughed violently. Water, he rasped. A glass was handed to him. He downed it in a single gulp. The room remained silent. Okay, he wheezed. That's not mild. You still live, the Pyrrhic chef said in awe. Yeah, Soren croaked. But I think I might have just invented a new way to cry. He didn't attend any tastings the next day. The medical unit found minor throat burns and prescribed rest. He spent the day lying on his cot, watching clouds drift past the window. Vellner visited in the evening. You could refuse, Vellner said quietly. You are not required to continue. I know, Soren said. But I think this is helping. Not just the food stuff. The whole thing. We're learning about each other, right? Yes, Vellner replied. But learning should not require self-destruction. Soren managed a tired smile. It's not destruction. It's diplomacy. With extra capsaicin. Vellner paused, then offered a small container. It is yogurt, he said. From our hydro farms. Cooling to the body. Soren accepted it. Thanks. That's actually perfect. As he ate, he contemplated the absurdity of it all. A human, representing Earth, not through speeches or treaties, but by enduring the galaxy's most aggressive cuisines. And somehow, it was working. 3 days after the exchange, Soren Pike sat on an examination table inside the medical wing of the core delegation hall, stripped to the waist, wearing a disposable gown that itched like cheap wool. A soft hum filled the room, broken only by the occasional chirp from the diagnostic monitor. Dr. Kesh, a 6-limbed physician from the Varnassi, was gingerly pressing on Soren's abdomen with one of her upper hands while manipulating a translucent display with another. Her lower limbs shifted occasionally to maintain balance, her long neck craning closer as she peered at the scan. You have minor esophageal abrasions and moderate inflammation in your gastric lining, she said, her accent smooth but clipped. Nothing permanent, but you'll need to avoid irritants for several rotations. Irritants like alien napalm peppers? Soren asked. Yes, she said, deadpan. And also your human equivalent. Whatever hellberry or mouth-torch you people invented next. It's chilly, he muttered, rubbing his temple. And yeah, I'm done with interstellar hot sauce for a while. Kesh tapped the side of her head, opening a secondary readout. I'm also registering elevated cortisol and disrupted sleep rhythms. You've been pushing through symptoms. I had to represent, he said, trying not to sound defensive. Didn't want to look weak in front of 300 species. That is not representation, she replied. That is self-endangerment disguised as patriotism. He leaned back slightly, frowning. You speak standard better than most humans I know. I studied Earth linguistics for 6 cycles, she said. Your language is infuriating. You have a word for flavor explosion, but no culturally agreed term for rest. I think that says more about us than the language. She handed him a cup of thick, greenish fluid. Drink. What is it? Cooling agent. Coats the lining. Tastes like algae and regret. He sniffed it, winced, and drank. It was colder than expected, and the aftertaste clung like wet seaweed. I haven't gagged this hard since I accidentally drank old coffee that had a bug in it. Congratulations, Kesh said. You're now medically boring again. Avoid irritants, hydrate, and sleep more than 4 Earth hours per cycle. He slid off the table. So I'm cleared. You're not banned from public appearances, she said. But if you take another bite of combustive food, I will have your stomach lining printed on a warning flyer. He nodded, grabbed his shirt, and left. Later that evening, Soren wandered into the secondary observation deck, a quiet place where delegates watched the shifting auroras of the nebulite curtain through reinforced glass. The room was dim, lit only by blue tracking lights along the floor. He sat alone, letting the silence settle around him. A few minutes passed before a figure entered tall, with a segmented body draped in formal silk. The Ilari were not known for spontaneous conversation, but this one approached with a deliberate grace. Its mouthparts clicked softly before the translator activated. You are the human who withstood the Vern root. Soren sighed. Apparently that's my entire personality now. I am Yalith, third voice of the Ilari conclave. May I sit? He gestured to the bench. Sure. Yalith lowered itself, limbs folding in a fan-like cascade. We observed your participation, it said. Your tolerance is alarming. I'm starting to think it's a liability. You altered diplomatic dynamics without issuing a single strategic statement. Not sure that's a compliment. It is not judgment. It is curiosity. Your species lacks natural armor, no venom, no claws. Your capacity lies in enduring discomfort long past the point of sense. That's what we call grit, or stubbornness. Depends on who you ask. Yalith swiveled 2 of its eye clusters toward him. Do all humans willingly harm themselves to impress others? He laughed, then stopped. No, but we do a lot of strange things to connect. Eating weird food, making each other laugh, seeing who can survive the coldest lake without screaming. This is a bonding ritual? More or less. It's how we measure trust, sometimes. Shared pain, shared story. Yalith was quiet a moment. We once believed the Ilari who consumed the most bitter root were the wisest. Now, we know they were merely dehydrated and hallucinating. Soren chuckled. Sounds about right. More quiet passed between them. Then, if you were not intending to assert power, Yalith asked, why did you continue? I guess I wanted to prove we could handle what the galaxy throws at us. Even if it's a fruit that makes your lungs sweat. Yalith nodded slowly. Perception shapes diplomacy. Even accidents become doctrine if repeated enough. Great, Soren said. So now every first contact team from Earth's getting handed fire fruit and told to smile. They sat in silence again, watching the ribbons of color ripple across the void. After a time, Yalith stood. Your endurance is noted. But your limits are what make you comprehensible. When Soren returned to his quarters, he found a sealed container on his bed, a care package from the Avianian medical staff. Inside were electrolyte packets, neutral broths, and a handwritten note that read, in elegant, curved script, resilience is not the absence of pain, but the decision to carry it kindly. That night, he slept for 9 hours straight. 2 days later, a closed session council met to discuss trade protocol amendments. Soren was asked to attend, not to speak, but to observe. He sat quietly, sipping neutral tea and watching as delegates debated tariff structures on mineral rights. During a pause, a representative from the Olari leaned toward him. Her skin shimmered like polished copper, her expression unreadable. My son asked if humans can eat lightning, she said. Soren blinked. What did you tell him? I said probably not, but now I'm unsure. He smiled faintly. No lightning. Yet. She nodded, satisfied. After the meeting, Velner waved him over near the hall exit. There is an invitation, he said. From the Diplomatic Culinary Consortium. Soren narrowed his eyes. Is this another attempt to incinerate my organs? They wish to understand your palate. Not test it. I'll go, he said. But I'm bringing my own antacids. That evening, the consortium presented a sampling menu not of extremes, but of nuance. Delicate flavors, subtle textures, dishes that required patience to appreciate. Soren approached cautiously, half expecting something to ignite, but nothing did. He tasted a chilled foam that changed flavor with temperature, a root broth that numbed the tongue slightly, and a gelatin that responded to ambient emotion. The chefs watched closely, not for pain, but for reaction. "This is good," he said quietly. "Really good." One of the chefs, a delicate, bioluminescent being from the Polari collective, tilted her head. "You do not seek challenge, then?" "I think I've had enough fire for one lifetime," he said. "There's something to be said for subtlety." The chef nodded. "Then we are honored." "We feared human appreciation could only be provoked through intensity." "Not true," Soren replied. "We just don't always slow down enough to notice the quiet stuff." By the end of the evening, he felt full without pain, warmed without burning. When he returned to his quarters, he found a small note slipped under his door. It was from Yalith. "Your fire was loud, but your silence was louder. Thank you for both." He folded the note, placed it in his jacket pocket, and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since he'd arrived, no part of him hurt. And he realized, maybe this was diplomacy too. Not the grand gestures or the dramatic moments, but the quiet understanding that humans could meet the galaxy not just with bluster, but with balance. He closed his eyes and slept. The next time Soren Pike entered the core delegation hall, he walked with a faint limp, not from injury, but from the stiffness that followed 3 days of enforced rest, bland food, and being told no by multiple species with more authority over his digestive tract than he'd ever thought possible. He passed under the arched entrance alone. No entourage, no fanfare. Just a reusable water pouch and a quiet resolve not to ingest anything warmer than room temperature. Inside, the hall was hosting a cultural demonstration led by the Telethi, a photosynthetic species whose limbs moved like trailing kelp. They'd converted the center rotunda into a sensory garden, filled with filtered light, low-humming structures, and mineral mists that smelled faintly of crushed stone and sea air. Delegates wandered barefoot through the space, encouraged to experience the textures and temperatures underfoot. Soren hesitated at the entrance. A Telethi guide approached, tall, translucent, with veins that glowed faintly green beneath its skin. "You are the human?" it asked without preamble. "Unfortunately, yes. You are welcome to participate. There is no ingestion required." Music to my ears. He removed his shoes and stepped onto the first path, a soft, ridged surface that flexed under his weight. The texture was somewhere between moss and memory foam. As he walked, the Telethi hovered beside him. "Your species adapts by novelty," it said. "We adapt by stillness. This garden teaches recalibration." Soren ran a hand along one of the humming towers. "Not sure we're great at stillness. We fidget. We invent things we don't need. We turn relaxation into productivity. Perhaps that is why you burn your tongues," it replied. He laughed softly. "Maybe so." They continued along the path in silence. The air grew cooler, the ground slick with smooth stones that shifted slightly with each step. The tower hums dropped in pitch, vibrating through his bones. The Telethi paused. How did it feel? What? To be witnessed in pain. Soren stopped walking. Uncomfortable. But not because of the pain itself. Because it was shared? Because it was expected. Like the room was waiting to see if I'd fail. The Telethi blinked slowly. Failure is a human word. We would say you were exploring a limit. Back home, that's still failure if you fall over the line. Then your definitions are narrow. They reached the end of the path. Soren stepped onto a platform that pulsed faintly beneath his feet, then dimmed. You are calibrated, the Telethi said. You may return. He bowed slightly, unsure if that was appropriate, and retrieved his shoes. Later that afternoon, he sat in a hydroponic lounge on Deck 4, sipping a pale broth made from Earth-compatible tubers. It was unseasoned, bland, and exactly what his stomach could tolerate without protest. Across from him, a member of the Zalari delegation adjusted the filters on its breathing mask. You are no longer consuming volatile matter, it said. Correct. We calculated your threshold had not yet been reached. You were calculating how far I could go? We were curious. Soren set down his cup. I'm not a lab rat. You entered the sequence voluntarily. I didn't realize the sequence was a thing. The Zalari nodded slowly. Your endurance suggested otherwise. Soren leaned back in his chair. I didn't do it to prove something. I didn't know there was anything to prove. Yet you continued. Because I thought it mattered. To us. To everyone. The Zalari looked at him for a long moment. It did. Soren exhaled through his nose and picked up the cup again. Well, I'm retired now. No more culinary brinkmanship. If someone wants to know about humanity, they can read a book. You altered diplomatic posture, the Zalari replied. Tensions among 3 delegations eased after your demonstration. They found your reactions both relatable and absurd. It disarmed them. They were disarmed by a man crying into a bowl of lava stew? They were disarmed by the scale of your willingness. Soren shook his head. That's not sustainable. Agreed. But it was effective. As the Zalari departed, Soren was left with his cooling broth and the distant hum of a language he didn't understand. He finished eating, dropped the container into the reclamator, and headed for the communications deck. The terminal he used had a narrow privacy shield and a view of the docking ring. He pulled up the latest messages from Earth, mostly administrative. Then one from his sister. Saw the clip. You're ridiculous. Also, Mom says stop eating glowing stuff. He smiled and deleted it without replying. A notification pinged. Incoming invitation personal. He opened it. A request from the Safari diplomat he'd met during the exchange. He tapped accept. An hour later, he entered a quiet chamber high above the main concourse. The walls shimmered silver blue, and the floor was layered with soft mesh. The Safari greeted him with a bow. We have prepared an observation. You are not required to comment. I can do that. They led him to a low dais where a set of clay instruments sat in a circle. Each one emitted a faint resonance. Not music exactly, but tone. The Safari touched them one by one, creating a progression of sounds that evoked shifting wind and running water. Soren listened without speaking. After several minutes, the sound faded. The diplomat turned to him. That was a representation of the discomfort you endured. His mouth opened, then closed. You made music out of my stomach lining? We made music from the concept of continued resistance. He considered that. Was I supposed to cry? No. But you may sit. He sat. They sat together, not talking, for several minutes. When he finally left, it was to a message from Kesh, the medic. Final skin clear. No remaining inflammation. You were released from dietary restriction. Caution still advised. He tapped the screen and let it go dark. The following day, the core delegation held a closing summit for the cycle. Delegates gave short addresses, reviewed new agreements, and acknowledged cultural contributions. Soren was not scheduled to speak, but Vellner approached him during the second intermission. There is time remaining on the address docket. I'm not authorized. You are not forbidden. He stood in the wings for several minutes before stepping onto the platform. The amphitheater quieted. I'm not a trained diplomat, he began. I came here by accident. Literally. Someone else got sick, and I happened to be nearby. A few chuckles. I didn't plan to become the guy who eats things no one else will touch. But I guess if that's what it took to get us talking, it was worth it. He let the silence breathe. Pain isn't a language, but it's close. It's honest. You can fake a smile, fake politeness, but you can't fake your face turning red and your eyes watering. A few delegates nodded. I learned something from every dish, every question, every stare. I learned that being human means adapting, not because we're fearless, but because we're scared and curious at the same time. He paused. I'm going home soon, and I'll tell them we're seen. Not because we're powerful, not because we're advanced, but because we showed up, got burned a little, and stayed anyway. He left the stage without applause, as was the norm. Back in his quarters, he packed slowly. A few gifts, a few data pads, a note from Yalith folded into his side pocket. The transport to Earth left in 13 hours. He watched the stars from the viewport, sipping the last of the Telethi mineral tea left in his ration drawer. When the light dimmed for sleep cycle, he didn't resist it. He'd done what he came to do even if he never meant to. The galaxy, it seemed, had taken notice. Not of conquest or invention, but of a man who ate fire, cried a little, and called it diplomacy.